So today's video is going to be about poetic sound devices. These are devices that authors put in poems and narratives as well to add an element of sound. The trick to these items in a poem, you're not going to notice them really unless you read the poem out loud. Poems are meant to be read out loud because authors have purposely added sound devices or tricks of language that make it sound good to the ear. So the ones we're going to go through here, the page you should have set underneath here, so this is a tab system, you should have glued the definitions all the way down to the page and then glued just the tab of the terms and then cut your flaps apart so you can see one at a time with its term and its definition. So we're going to start with assonance, and I always kind of give myself a clue. It starts with an A, which is a vowel, and that is part of its definition. So this is the repetition, and repetition means to repeat. So the repetition of the same vowel sound anywhere in a word, in a series of words. And then we wrote vowels. If you can't remember from kindergarten and first grade when you were learning to read, the vowels are A, E, I, O, and U. Now some of you will be, and sometimes Y and W. Y and W really are not vowels. However, sometimes they sound like one of these others. For example, Y sometimes sounds like an E. Y itself is not a vowel, the letter, but the sound it can make can mimic an E or an I, and then the W sometimes mimics an O or a U sound. So that's why sometimes they say Y or W. But what we're looking here is not how a word is spelled, but how it sounds. These are all about sound. So we're looking for, in a word, a vowel sound is repeated. And you'll get some chances to look at some examples during stations. But this is when vowel sounds anywhere in a word are repeated. So then next we'll go to consonants. And again, I use this little clue. This starts with a C, and you can almost hear the root word. Consonants, not vowels, but consonants. So all the other letters in the alphabet. So this is the repetition, again, the repeating of the same consonant sounds among words. This can be in the middle or the end, not the beginning. This is tricky because when a consonant sound is repeated at the beginning of a word, it's alliteration, which we talked about previously in figurative language. Consonance is everything but the beginning sound. So a consonant that is repeated in the middle or at the end, just not the beginning. But it has to be a consonant. So any of the letters that are not vowels. Next sound device, probably the one you are the most familiar with. You've been listening to rhyme since you were a toddler. The books that your parents read to you a lot of times had rhyme because it's really pleasing to the ear. So again, we're talking about repetition or repeating. So it's the repetition of the same ending sound in two or more words. Some kids get confused. Rhyme really has nothing to do with the middle of words. It's that last sound. When the word is finished, that sound, if it gets repeated, it rhymes. Day, may. That's rhyme because the last sounds are the same. And then rhythm, somewhat related to rhyme, but this is when you hear a poem and you can really sense that it has its own beat. You listen and it sounds like da-da, 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 da-da. That's its rhythm. So it says audible. Audible is a big, fat, fancy word for ear. Anything you can hear is auditory or audible. It's the audible pattern in poetry made by stressed and unstressed syllables. Don't let that confuse you. All it means is some syllables have a strong stress and some don't. So the poem sounds like it has a beat or rhythm. So again, when you hear da 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 da, You can tell that some of those beats are heavy and some are light. That's rhythm. And then repetition, which we've mentioned every single time up till now. Sometimes a poet simply will repeat a word, a phrase, or a line to give emphasis. Let's say they really want to stress the word spring. They might repeat the word spring 7 times in their poem. They're doing that for a reason. They want you, the reader, to hear the word spring, spring, spring over and over because it's important. So this is the repeating of words or phrases to give emphasis. They want you to know that that word, that phrase, that line is very important. So they repeat it. And then finally, we have meter. We're not going to spend a ton of time talking about meter. Meter is related to rhyme and rhythm. Meter is basically the rhythmic structure. Every poem has a rhythmic structure, and we usually name it. So let's say a poem has the same rhythm or across 5 lines. There's a fancy name. It's called iambic pentameter. We're not going to get into that very much, but every poem has a rhythmic structure to each verse. So each set of 1 line, 3 lines has a structure. That's its meter. Again, we're not going to talk about it a ton, but we just want you to know what it is. So there's your poetic sound devices. In the next video, we're going to spend a little more time on the most important one, which is rhyme.